So a plan for what we're going to do over the next, I hope about 45 minutes, 40 minutes, is we'll go through how to analyze the job description so that you know how to tailor your resume. This is a really important step. We'll talk through strategies for creating more effective and captivating resumes, and I saw that coming up a lot in the chat. We'll write stronger accomplishment statements and develop a professional brand. We'll go over key components to a cover letter. I might rush through that when we'll make sure that we share the slides with everyone, so you will have the templates for what we recommend for cover letters. And then, as Teresa has mentioned several times, we have an optional activity, and we're hoping that that runs from about 2 to 2:30, where if you have a resume with you, we will be happy to set up an activity where you will do some peer-to-peer feedback on those resumes. And with that, I'd love to get just a little bit of a sense of how you are all feeling about resumes right now. So Teresa, if we could launch the poll. Strong consensus for an answer so far, but we'll let a couple more people vote. Oh, good, we got it. So thank you all for participating in that. Very strong consensus around sales pitch. 0 people interested in writing academic papers, and that totally hear all of you who are feeling that way about this right now. I have a PhD. I don't love writing academic papers anymore. It's interesting, though, there are some similarities between academic papers and what we're doing with resumes and cover letters. Movie trailer, really interested in understanding a little bit why people are thinking movie trailer. Someone had trouble deciding between sales pitch and movie trailer. Yeah, it'd be great if you could select all that apply and we could have multiple answers. So that's great. Thank you all for sharing in that. And I can move on now. So all of your answers leaned heavily towards sales pitch, and that, you know, could be indicative of the type of positions that you're interested in, or it could be indicative of the perception that we have of resumes and cover letters. But we'll get through some of the sort of best practices in what we can do, and I'll highlight some of the ways in which a resume, even though it doesn't look like a persuasive document, is a persuasive document. So it could be a sales page, or it could be an academic paper. Nuts and bolts of CVs and resumes. So for graduate student group, love to put in the comparison with an academic CV. For undergraduate students, I don't always put this comparison in because it doesn't really make sense. But a CV is something that really focuses on content expertise or subject matter expertise and the different ways that we can demonstrate that. Whereas a resume is a shorter document that really focuses on a summary of the skills that you have that are relevant to the employer that you're submitting this resume to. So academics, your audience is academics in your field or a granting agency or whoever it might be that you're submitting it to. The resume is typically for the hiring manager or the hiring team. Length for CVs can be unlimited. I mean, you don't want to stretch that too much. Resumes are 1 or 2 pages. What we hear is that there's a preference for 1 page for resumes in management consulting. Some parts of engineering and finance are the places that are most strongly interested in a 1-page resume. And that's for entry-level positions. If you're looking at more mid-level or senior-level positions, it's probably a 2-page resume, and it might even be a longer resume. The focus of an academic CV is on your achievements that demonstrate your potential for future achievements, whereas the focus of a resume is on the skills and experience and education you have that prove that you're a fit for the position. In an academic CV, we have to list education, awards, publications, presentations, research and teaching experience, potentially industry experience. Whereas a resume, we really want to focus on just the things that are relevant to the position that we're applying to. In an academic CV, you might include your references if it's requested. In a resume, we never include references unless they're very explicitly requested. So some basics about resumes. And I mentioned already, they're either 1 or 2 full pages for entry-level positions. They can be longer for mid-level or senior level positions, but for entry-level positions, 1 or 2 pages. And there are very few industries where 1 page is the expectation. And those are management consulting, finance, stuff like retail and sales. Expect that 1 page, and then the engineering things that look more like consulting would fit into the 1 page, and the engineering things that look more like research would go for a 2-page. Name and contact information does go at the top of the document, and you can see an example on the right-hand side of the slide where there's name, telephone number, email address, and a LinkedIn profile. You do not need to, and this is North American specific information, you don't need to include your date of birth, your citizenship, or a headshot. You want to make sure that your formatting is consistent throughout, and we use bullet points to really place emphasis on the skills that the employer said that they were looking for. And so the first thing to do when you're trying to construct a resume is to review a specific job posting and look for what skills they say they're looking for. And these are what we might call the key transferable skills or the key technical skills in the job posting. And clues to look for what's important are frequency. So if they say communication skills 5 times in that job posting, communication skills are probably important. If they say communication skills first, and they maybe like bold it or put exclamation marks after it, or they like otherwise highlight that, it's an indication of the importance of that skill to what they're looking for. You might also read between the lines. So a job posting, it depends how much time and energy they put into writing that job posting. There might be skills that they are looking for and they forgot to say. And this is where networking plays a really key role in understanding what they might not have said in the job posting, and of the things that they've put in the job posting, what are their priorities? If you have a connection already in the unit or in the team or in the institution or industry that's hiring, it's great to follow up with them and just say, can I ask you some questions about this job before I submit my application? If you have no contacts, it is okay to reach out to a hiring manager and say, are you the hiring manager? Can you answer questions about this job? And do you have time to answer questions about this job before the deadline? They might say no, but it is okay to ask some questions. And then once you get there, the types of questions you want to ask are, what's a typical day going to look like? What is a priority for someone to be able to do when they get here? What's the expectation for success 6 months into the position? So asking some of those questions will help you parse what they're saying in the job posting. You also want to pay attention to industry-specific language and terminology, because you need to repeat their language back to them to show that you are a fit. Research the company, the hiring manager, and the industry as much as possible. So online search, but then those in-person conversations are the best way to get a better sense of what they're looking for and whether it's the right opportunity for you at this time. So an activity that I often recommend people do the first time they're constructing a resume, or the first time they're sort of constructing a resume for the types of positions they're interested in, is to go to the job posting and construct a T-chart such as the one on the slide here. So on the left-hand column, it's writing the skills exactly as they are in the job posting. So when you see a job that you're interested in, the first thing that you should do is copy and paste that to a Google Doc or a OneDrive document, so that you have a copy of that job posting, because it's going to disappear from the internet, but you need a copy of that job posting when you get invited in for an interview. The other thing that you can do with that job posting is then copy and paste the key phrases from the job posting into a T-chart like this, where you figure out what they say they're looking for. And then on the right-hand side of this T-chart, you list the different things that you've done that demonstrate that you have that skill or that qualification or that personality trait that they say they're looking for. And you can draw from anything here when you're thinking through experiences. It could be paid work experience, it can be volunteer experience, it can be clubs or co-curricular activities, it can be classes, it can be lab work that you've done, it can be other research activities that you've engaged in. Anything counts as experience that you might be able to use to demonstrate the skill they say they're looking for. And so as an example, what we might do is take a look at this technical consultant, so this engineering position. And you can see that they got essential job functions as the first set of bullet points, and then qualifications that they're looking for. If I was constructing a T-chart for myself for this position, I would just copy and paste every single detail from this into a separate row. So each bullet point would be a row in that T-chart, and then I would think through where I've demonstrated project management and administration. So if I have one experience doing that, great. If I have 5 experiences doing that, even better. Then I think through what the experiences are that I've done client consultation. Then I think through when I've done client meetings, working with teams, correspondence preparation, proposal presentations. Then I think through, okay, they're looking for a university or college diploma related to engineering or architecture. So I have to make sure that my educational background is on here. Then they're looking for stuff like technically oriented, good analytical and organizational skills, attention to detail, ability to be able to complete tasks and projects in established timelines, and so on. So I would figure out everything that I've done that meets those qualifications. And then that tells me what needs to go into my resume. So I know I need my education section. I know I need my graduate work, my research work. I know I need some paid experiences and some volunteer experiences. And I make sure that I put those things in, and then under them, I start to list the skills that I have that are what they're looking for in the job posting, so that I have a little bit of a template for what I'm doing when I'm submitting this resume. And then we'll develop those accomplishment statements a little bit better. I'll show you how we can do that in a moment. But that's the first activity. Every time you see a job posting, you want to sort of construct that T-chart. The first time it's the most important that you do that. After, it's about tweaking your resume for this particular application. So always save a unique version of your resume for every job you apply to, so that you're not overwriting a document that you're calling my resume. Every applicant tracking system, I saw someone ask about that in the chat earlier, every applicant tracking system, so every system that you submit your resume and cover letter to, functions a little bit differently, but they all request a specific form of file name. And it's usually some version of your name and the position ID. And so just get in the habit of putting your name and the position ID as the file name for your resume and cover letter. Some common sections for resumes. As I said, education and experience absolutely have to go into your resume. And then the other sections are optional if you have space, because they might help articulate additional skills or qualifications that they're looking for, or they might be a nice way to really highlight different things that you're bringing to the role. So if you have space for a summary or a profile or a highlight of qualifications at the top of your resume, great. If you don't have space for that, if you have 2 full pages of education and experience, don't worry about that section. Your education section, you have to include the awards, scholarships, and achievements. You might find a way to include them just in your education section. You might just have a select list of awards and scholarships, or you might use your awards and scholarships and achievements to sort of prove that you have demonstrated the skills that you're talking about. Your experience can be broken up in a number of ways. You might just have a single section that says experience. You might have multiple sections that say things like relevant experience or technical consulting experience, and then another section that's other experience or other relevant experience. You might have research experience, volunteer experience, leadership experience. There's lots of different categories, and you want to figure out what's the best way to structure your sections so that the most interesting and relevant experiences are as far up your resume as possible. Even if it's something that you did in high school, but it happens to be the most relevant thing that you've done, you want to figure out a way to have your section headings so that that's either at the top of the resume or immediately after your education section. You might also include other sections like technical skills and languages, certificates, conferences and training, memberships and affiliations. This all really depends on the positions that you're applying to. So as I said, one of the key pieces, once we've figured out what experiences to include, then we have to figure out how to tell them that we have the skills that they said that they were looking for. And we do this through what are called accomplishment statements. And so what are accomplishment statements? Accomplishment statements are bullet points that describe your experiences. And we write accomplishment statements to show the impact of what we did in the previous experiences. And so they always take the form of starting with a strong action verb, and this is usually lifted straight from the job posting, or a cluster of strong action verbs. So it might make sense to have one bullet point that says research and another bullet point that says analyze, or it might make sense to just merge those and say research and analyze. And that's okay. Either way is fine. And after the action verb, you want to have a description of what you did. And then finally, you want to wrap up with purpose or impact of what you did. And I'll show you some examples and different styles of writing accomplishment statements to really concretize what I'm talking about here. So there's two broad types of accomplishment statements. There's qualitative accomplishment statements and there's quantitative accomplishment statements. Quantitative are slightly better because the numbers in them really pop when a hiring manager is reviewing a resume. Qualitative are great if you just don't have numbers to insert. So an example of a quantitative accomplishment statements might be something like reduced costs by $3,000 each month by eliminating unnecessary servers and consolidating databases. So there's a description of what this person did, and then there's the impact. And the impact is right away. Reduced costs by $3,000 each month. And so the skill is reducing costs. Presumably that was directly out of the job posting. And then there's the impact and the specific steps that this person took to have that impact. In terms of qualitative, so it might not be possible to have those numbers, although this one does still have numbers, but engineered designs for bone screws and ergonomic handles for 5 implant devices using SolidWorks, which were used in final pre-production stage. So there's no measurable impact, or this person like participated in the project to this point, and they don't know what happens after the pre-production stage, and so they're only able to link the impact to that moment in the production process. And then there's other ways of formatting a single experience to say multiple different skills. And so for instance, you might have sales experience. And so a typical way of talking about sales experience, especially if you were applying to another sales position, might be sold tickets for 50-50 raffle draws at varsity football games, surpassing the $2,000 fundraising target needed to purchase new team jerseys. So this is a quantitative example and it's a sales example. But let's say you have that sales experience, but you're not applying for a sales position. Maybe they're looking for leadership experience. And in that sales experience, you're actually coordinating a team of 5 volunteers, including hiring, training, and supervising to ensure all raffle sales targets were met. So here we're pivoting a particular experience and talking about it in the language of the employer where they're looking for leadership experience, but what we're pulling from is a sales experience. And so we're going to talk about that sales experience in a slightly different way to connect with what this employer says they're looking for. So instead of describing it in the sense of this varsity fundraising position, they would talk about selling tickets, but in another position, what they're looking for is that coordination, that leadership experience. They might also be looking for project management experience, and you might be able to pivot that sales experience to talk about project management experience. So developed a project plan that outlined the project scope, key dates, and success metrics resulting in exceeding raffle sales target before the deadline. So the same skill that we start with, we could talk about in multiple different ways, connecting to an employer's needs. Just take a moment here. If there are any questions, I'm about to move on to cover letters. If there's any questions about resumes, feel free to type them in the chat if there's anything that I can clarify right now, or there will be time for Q&A in about 10 or 15 minutes. Great. Yeah, a couple questions in here, and they're really, really good questions. Yes, okay. So the accomplishment statements go underneath an experience. And so if I go, give me a second to go back to the resume sample that we had up here on this one. So you can see the different experiences that this individual has under professional experience and additional relevant experience. And then under that, we have a number of bullet points. And some of these were actually examples that we had come up on other slides. And so each bullet point is a skill or a cluster of skills, and they are specific to that experience. And then to the other question, we always list things reversed chronologically, and that's why I was talking about having section headings that allow you to do what this particular student has done. So if they were to just list experience, the first experience on their resume should be the Bionona Engineering Student Association, because it is an ongoing experience. And so that would be the first experience, but for the position they're applying for, this professional experience, the Apotex position, is the most relevant. And so they've called it professional experience to separate it from the other things that they've done so that they can have it be first. And then another question that just came in on the chat was about sort of the importance of resumes in the hiring process or when they're reviewed. And it really depends on the hiring team. What we know from hiring managers broadly is that it takes them about 20 to 30 seconds to review a resume and cover letter before they make a decision about whether someone is getting an interview or not. So they're reading these really fast. An applicant tracking system has the capacity, not everyone uses it this way, but applicant tracking systems have the capacity to do a really elaborate keyword search on a document to produce a percentage match to the job posting. Even if they don't use the applicant tracking system that way, if they get an electronic version of the file, they can still do Control F or a search on the document and look for the words they're looking for. Or because we all format it with those bullet points and the verbs immediately after the bullet points, all I do when I'm reading resumes is just look down on the left-hand side of the page, the right-hand side of the page, so that I can see dates, position titles, and the keywords that I'm looking for. And then I dig into the middle when I want to try and understand the skills, but I just start by orienting myself to the whole page and then looking down the left-hand side and the right-hand side at the same time. and digging into the middle when and where I need it. And so typically resumes are reviewed in that process to determine if you're getting the interview. They might come back to it before the interview, although I wouldn't guarantee it. And again, depending on the hiring environment, they might come back to it again after the interview, or they might consult it during the interview. There's quite a bit of variety there in terms of how people do that. But typically, the expectation is that the resume is the path to getting an interview, and then there's not much that they do with it after that. There are some times when they will go back to it. Verb tenses, I'm a historian by training, so I like past tense when things are in the past and present tense when things are in the present, but there are lots of different ways that people structure their resume, and it's up to you to just figure out what verb tense or verb tenses make sense for you. There is no specific requirements on page margins. If it gets way too packed, then that might be a little bit of a problem. So you want to think through aesthetically what works for you, and if it makes more sense to go onto a second page or a third page and have more white space, or if it makes more sense to condense it and not have very much white space. Entirely up to you. For, as I said earlier, entry-level positions, we've heard 1 or 2 pages, with finance, retail, consulting be the places that prefer 1 page, and most other places preferring 2 pages. For experienced professionals, 2, 3, I've even seen longer than 3 pages. Really depends on how much time, how much space it's going to take to demonstrate that you're a good fit for the position. Validation hyperlinks, and this is where I like to include awards as proof that you have a skill. With most resumes being reviewed electronically, you could put hyperlinks in, entirely up to you. You could save the validation stuff for your LinkedIn profile. The interest section is totally optional. If you have a little bit of space, it's great for them to get to know you a little bit better, but it is not always something that we have space for. Level of expertise, you want to use the language that they're using to indicate the level of expertise that they're looking for. So if they say excellent, just say excellent. It doesn't matter if you don't feel like you're excellent, just say excellent in terms of your level of expertise. PhD research can be counted as work experience, absolutely. Matching system, this is the part. So yes, you do want to copy. I hope that the applicant tracking systems are sophisticated enough to grab the root. So if they said communicating in the job posting, I hope that you are able to say communicate or communicated instead of communicating. And I've never really been able to get a good answer from an applicant tracking, someone who uses an ATS, to find out what they say they're looking for. Once you've used their words once, then you can start using synonyms or your preferred way of talking about a skill, but you do have to reflect their language back to them at least once in the resume. And then, yeah, the master resume is another great idea. So to make this easier on yourself, if you have a single resume that you just copy and paste all of your skills statements as you generate them, or all of your accomplishment statements as you generate them, if you just have them all in one spot, that T-chart process becomes really easy, because you just say, okay, I need to talk about these experiences and these skills, and you just copy and paste them over from either a single resume where you store all those things, or maybe you just open like the 5 most relevant resumes that you've generated that are similar to the position that you're applying for, and copy and paste in the relevant things. So resume generation is challenging at first, but should become easier as you start to apply for more and more positions, especially as they're related. Good. So last question, and then we'll move on to the cover letter piece. So how do we accurately figure out who the hiring manager is? If they have a good website, you should be able to find it on the website. Job postings rarely say that you'll be reporting to Teresa Didion, but they might list Teresa's job title. And so then you have to do a Google search to figure out what Teresa, or like who has that job title. So you go to LinkedIn, you search that job title. You go to the U of T iLead website, you search that job title, and you might find Teresa. Even when websites aren't great, so if you're looking at, say, government work, the websites aren't always all that good, but there is a government directory, and there's also a University of Toronto directory, and they are very good. They don't usually come up as search results, like you actually have to go into that tool and search using the tool, because the search results from that tool don't usually feed into the Google search results. And that can be the way to figure out who the hiring manager is. So it's a combo of Google and things like LinkedIn, where you would figure out who you think the hiring manager is. And usually you're having to search by job title in order to figure out who the person is that holds that job title. And if you're not able to figure it out, you could still just reach out to someone in that organization and say, hey, I saw this position, I'm really interested in it. We have these things in common. Would you be able to talk to me about it? Or would you be able to refer me to someone who could answer my questions about that position? And I'm happy to sort of meet with anyone one-on-one and talk through a specific strategy for a specific job posting. I was going to mention that later when we were talking about additional resources, but you can book a one-on-one appointment with any career educator, and we can talk about your job search strategy. We can talk about networking. We can talk about your specific application materials. Whatever you would like to do, you can get support from Career Exploration and Education. Thank you for all of those great questions. I'm going to go through the cover letters really, really quickly, and then we'll have time for more questions after that, I'm hoping. So cover letter serves multiple purposes, and we hear from hiring managers that some of them love cover letters and they read them, some of them don't read cover letters, and some of them read cover letters second. You write your cover letter for those people who read it first, because the needs that the person who's reading it second are looking for are still met by what you do for the person who's reading the cover letter first. And the person who's reading the cover letter first, you're introducing your professional personality, you're highlighting your relevant skills, you're showing the connection between things that you've done in the past to the position you're applying for. You demonstrate your ability to understand what they're looking for. You demonstrate your ability to write in a slightly different style than how you write your resume, and you explain why you're interested in the position. In terms of format and structure, and there's some samples on our website that I'll show you. I'll show you in our resources, and we'll share the slides with you after as well. But format, cover letters are almost always one page. The header of it should be the same as the top of your resume. You should have the date on it. We recommend top left, although I personally use top right, and it's fine. You want to have a salutation, and where possible, you want to address it directly to the person who's the hiring manager. If you don't have the ability to figure out who the hiring manager is, then dear hiring manager is one way to do it. To whom it may concern is a bit dated, but it is also fine. Then you have a set of paragraphs. There's an opening paragraph where you say, I'm interested in applying for this position. You have a set of middle paragraphs. There could be 1, there can be 5, it really depends. And then there's a concluding final paragraph where you reiterate your interest in the position and let them know of their ability to contact you to schedule an interview. And then usually you just sign off with sincerely, and you type your name. And it's a nice touch if you're able to insert a digital signature between sincerely and your name. I see a few more questions coming in. Yeah, I will come to those questions a little bit later. Thank you for putting them in the chat as we're going. So here's an example of an opening paragraph. And again, we pulled straight from engineering, although it's a PEY example that we're looking at. So I'm writing in regard to your posting of professional year experience intern. engineering, posted on the University of Toronto's Engineering Career Centre website. So what and where it is that you are applying to and where you heard about it. I've had the opportunity to develop and apply my biomedical engineering skills through my previous coursework and internships. So summary of skills and experience, and then there's an interest statement. I'm eager to participate in Procter & Gamble's biomedical engineering technologist position, as I am highly interested in solving business issues on a multifunctional team. And then we wrap up, so skipping to the closing paragraph, you thank the employer for taking the time to review your application. You summarize your skills. So with my hands-on experience in creating novel designs to improve biomedical instruments and initiative to take on new projects, I am a strong candidate for this position. And then discuss next steps. I hope to have the opportunity to discuss my candidacy in an interview and look forward to hearing from you. And then middle paragraphs can take two broad approaches. There could be a skills-based version of a paragraph, or there could be an experience-based version of a middle paragraph. You do want to make sure that you're adding new information that enhances what's included in the resume. You want to make sure that your paragraphs include accomplishments in that same format as we talked about for resumes. And you want to make sure that you're ending the paragraph, or at some point in the paragraph, you're connecting it to the job requirements. So here's an example of a skill-based middle paragraph. So it's a single skill, but multiple experiences where this person has demonstrated that particular skill. So there's an accomplishment statement over the past 2 years. There's added information about that accomplishment. So this is evidenced in the skills designing and drafting. And then there's a relation to your job application. I have a good working knowledge of MATLAB and AutoCAD. An experience-based middle paragraph is where you talk about a single experience, but you might talk about multiple skills within that experience. So as a biomedical engineer, so single experience, added information, most notable developments was troubleshooting, syringe infusion, and then relate it to the job application, so biomedical technologist at Procter & Gamble. So why do we do these things? So there's a few questions that came in about cover letters. Let me just get back to those. If they ask for a cover letter, you submit a cover letter. If they don't ask for a cover letter, it's up to you. I still include them even if they don't ask, because I liked to write cover letters. If you don't like writing cover letters and they haven't explicitly asked for it, and you're confident that they're going to be able to navigate your resume without you telling them a short story about how to navigate your resume, then you could go without one. In the cases where you go without a resume, it is helpful to have an objective at the top of the resume, but again, only if you have space. If you're an experienced engineer, yes, you could potentially get to a 2-page cover letter. It really depends on what you would do. I wouldn't go longer than 2 pages for a cover letter for pretty much any position. So faculty members, if anyone here is also thinking about parallel planning and thinking about becoming a professor and looking at industry jobs, academic cover letters are usually 2 pages, although I've seen them be a little bit shorter and just be a single page. But 2 pages is sort of maximum length that I've seen for a cover letter. Font recommendations, no, anything that works well for you and you think is aesthetically pleasing. I like some consistency between the font in the resume and the cover letter, but you don't have to, as long as that's the letterhead that you're using or the header that you're using on your resume and cover letter is the same. That sort of doesn't really matter. Yeah, I think we already talked about that. There's no preference between the skills-based or the experience-based. It's really how you can best tell them how to navigate your resume and how you can best highlight sort of 2, 3, 4 things that make you the best possible fit for a position. Okay, so just want to wrap up briefly, and then we should have time for a few more questions, and then we can get into the breakout activity at 2. But in order to increase your chances, you might want to consider applying as early as possible. Some hiring managers start reviewing applications as soon as the applications open, and they make decisions fairly early, and they start scheduling interviews fairly early. Some will wait until the deadline, and they might like wait who applies early versus who waits to the deadline, but they might not. I mentioned earlier that possibility of trying to have a conversation with people you already know, or cold contacting people to try and get more information. And you want to find a balance in all of the applications you're sending out between getting out a high volume of applications and getting out high quality applications. And so sometimes you're not going to be able to connect with people before you submit an application, and that's okay. We've talked through a process of how to be really efficient in generating your resumes. And so if you got to that point where you're super efficient in generating resumes, get them out, right? And then spend your time and energy focusing in on trying to have conversations where you know it might have good impact on what your chances are, right? So the main reason to try and have those conversations with someone is so that you have additional information which will enhance the quality of your application. But because you've had a conversation with someone, there's reduced pressure to have a perfect application because there's someone who is going to go out of their way to look for your application in the pool because they've already had a conversation with you. So the conversations are dually helpful. You will write a better application, but there will be less pressure to write that better application. Okay, I've seen a few more questions have been coming in, so I'm just going to grab a sip of water and then I will read some more of these questions. It's a good question about whether applying for multiple positions at the same organization has an impact. Again, it really, really depends on what features they use with the applicant tracking system and how they do that. So at U of T, a hiring manager with our applicant tracking system can't see what else you've applied to. They can only see your application for that particular position. HR, or the recruiter for the position, can see multiple applications, but usually they just keep that information confidential and the hiring manager doesn't know that information. So the individual hiring manager might not know that you're applying multiple things. If, however, at U of T, for instance, you apply to multiple positions in the same team, they're going to know because they're going to recognize your name because they're reviewing your application multiple times. Some hiring managers will see that as eagerness or keenness to get a job, and they will sort of factor that in as positive. Others will look at it and say, you don't know what you're looking for. You're just blanket applying to everything, especially if your application isn't customized. And they might sort of decrease their evaluation of your application. So it's a really good question. A lot of the questions that you're asking me in the chat are really good questions to ask alumni about their career trajectory and what they've done with their documents. Really good questions to ask a hiring manager. Like, if someone was really interested in 2 potential positions here, do you recommend them focusing on one? Or do you recommend them just applying to everything that they're interested in? And it's going to be like hiring manager specific, it's going to be company specific, it's going to be team specific. So it's a good question to consistently ask people. Add dates for education and experience. Typically, yes, we do want to have the dates for the education and experience. It becomes problematic for the reasons that you're highlighting here. Like if there's a gap, that shouldn't be something that they hold against you. And that's where using a format of like professional experience and other relevant experience leaves the possibility that the gaps are just times where you were doing things that wasn't relevant to the position that you're applying to. So that can be a like sort of positive way of spinning this, but as you've identified, like those gaps can indicate family, and then that can be a discriminatory process in a hiring process. Putting dates on education can increase the chances of ageism creeping into how they're evaluating the resume. All of these things are grounds on which they should not discriminate, but it doesn't mean that they won't. And there's not really an easy way to prove that someone has excluded your resume or like not interviewed you just because your education was 30 years ago, or just because there was a 5-year gap where they're assuming that you had kids and they don't want to deal with parents. So it shouldn't matter, and I can understand the hesitance about not wanting to include dates, but they're not supposed to negatively evaluate based on those dates. And happy to chat further about specific situations for that question. What kind of questions do we ask a hiring manager in general? So when you get that chance to talk to them, I think I mentioned earlier, like, what's an average day going to look like for the person that's in this position? What do you expect them to be able to do to be successful within a couple of weeks? What do you expect the successful candidate to be able to do 6 months into accepting this role? How would you describe the culture or the team environment here? All of those are good questions. What you want to ask are questions that help you figure out if you even want to apply to this position, and then what you should do to talk about the experiences you have in order to best demonstrate that you're a really good fit. When you go into those conversations, also expect that they're going to flip questions around on you and ask a little bit about why you're interested in the position and what broad experience you have that you think prepares you for the position. So do be prepared to answer some questions about yourself as well. We will email the slides and notify you of the recording. Another ditto on the gaps. So again, for people who are interested in gaps, that might be something that we need to talk about specific to your document, and how to navigate having conversations with people to figure out if the hiring manager is one of those people that might be discriminatory, and if withholding dates is to your advantage. But generally, employers don't love it when we withhold dates, because then they just go to an assumption that's the assumption that you were worried they were going to make based on not putting dates in. What kind of questions do we ask a CEO? We just went through that. If a position comes up and there's another hiring cycle, I would definitely want to talk to someone before submitting a second application, so that I get a sense of what I might do differently, because it might be that they reviewed my application and they didn't think I was a good fit. Or it might be that they hired someone else and they're now looking fresh, and so you might, want that opportunity to update your documents. Some people, another good question here about tackling gaps in a cover letter. Some people do it. Some people are very explicit, and like, I would love to live in a world where we can be explicit about why there are gaps in our documents. And we can be more inclusive and have that sense of belonging for parents, for folks of very different age ranges, for working in positions. I want to live in that world, and I want to get to the point where we can all sort of do what we want to do with our resumes, and there won't be any possibility of discrimination. So yes, I have seen people that have started tackling gaps in their resume explicitly. That's up to you. You're disclosing personal information, and then they have to handle it appropriately, but it's up to you whether you do that. Yeah, good question. So you want to have a generic version of a resume that you might be able to share with someone if they're like, tell me a little bit about yourself and I'd love to see a resume. So you want to have it sort of speak the jargon of the industry you're looking at, but also be generic enough that it could be for multiple positions in that industry. Color on a resume is great, especially if you're applying to a position that has design. So if you're applying to something that was engineering design, or something that was like architectural design. If you were doing something that had design component or communications component, I love a beautiful resume as opposed to a standard resume. You can do those even if the position doesn't require it, but definitely when it requires it. Yes, so master's students, you can include things from your bachelor's degree, PhDs, you can include things from your master's if you did one, or your bachelor's. Teresa's put another notice that we'll do a couple minutes late for our bonus activity. Co-op jobs from a decade ago, if that's your best experience, then you can definitely include it. You can go back as far as you need to demonstrate that you have the skills that they're looking for. If you can't meaningfully speak, like if they were to go into the interview and say, tell me about what you did as this cashier in grade 10, and you're like, I don't know, like I remember that I was a cashier, then it's probably not useful to include that experience in your resume anymore. But if you can say, I communicated with customers, I handled cash, if you're able to tell them exactly what you did and provide a specific example of a customer or a team interaction, then you can include those types of things. And as you get more professional experience in the industry that you get into post-graduation and an industry that you might stick around in a few years, you'll start to drop those experiences from 10 years ago or from high school or whatever those experiences might be that are sort of a bit more dated.